Okay, welcome back to the Cooking and Fishing Podcast. Now, first, a little bit of housekeeping. Both OG Silver Blades and the Dirty Jersey Blades are restocked on the website, cookingandfishing.com. Obviously, the virtual lessons are up there, both the single jig fluking and the jerkbait crankbait fluke course. Today, I'm sitting down with John Halkias to talk fluke fishing. Many of you might know him from his YouTube channel, JIGGING JERKS, and he runs just fishing charters out in eastern Long Island. Now, if there's an operation outside of Nantucket Shoals that has put more giant fluke on the deck for their clients, I'm certainly not aware of it. And having met John in person, I think you guys will agree that he is one of the nicest people you'll come across in the fishing community. In any case, and without further delay, I bring you Captain John Halkias. At this point, I would have introduced you in the intro, but if you wanted to just talk a little bit about your background as a charter captain, as a YouTube content creator, like how did you end up here? Maybe a little journey of your recent fishing history.
Yeah, Roger. I've been fishing my almost my entire life since I was about 7 years old. My dad got me into it. We bought a home here in Eastern Long Island when I was a little kid, and I spent my whole summers out here. And it's always been a passion of mine, fishing every single day. I started getting into boats 25, 26 years ago. I'm on my eighth boat now.
Wow.
And the charter stuff really was a byproduct of the YouTube stuff. And the YouTube stuff was really, we started fishing with John Skinner in 2017. My buddies and I met him randomly at the Rhode Island saltwater fishing expo that winter. Just coincidentally, conversation came up that he had moved to Greenport, and I said I keep my boat in Greenport, and we won't go into the crazy story of how we wound up actually fishing together, but dude, there's a really nutty story with that. We're not going to dive into that. Um, we wound up fishing with him, and I had another buddy of mine who I grew up with in Queens, next door neighbor, Tony Hong, who had a
Okay, yeah.
fishing channel also. And we had connected. I had watched some of his videos, and I'm like, this can't be the same Tony Hong I grew up with. And I had sent him like a message, and he was like, Yanni, because that was my name in Greek. So it was the same Tony Hong. So he came fishing with us before we fished with Skinner, and my buddy Doc came along, and Tony was like, you two need your own YouTube channel because
Nice.
poor Doc, if anybody who watches my videos, he catches a lot of abuse and it's all organic. None of it is made up. That's just how we are with each other. Um, but then when we met Skinner and we got to see those trips, which he did a lot of trips with us in 2017, when we got to relive them on YouTube, it was amazing. Like watching yourself catch these big fish and having it there forever, basically. So I started jigging jerks at that point in the next year, 2018, I started it. Um, and that first year of jigging jerks, I would get questions all the time because back then, and I think we'll dive into this a little later or at some point during the chat today, Roger. Um, Montauk was on fire. It was almost impossible not to limit and catch big fluke when you'd go to Montauk in those
Right.
years, like the prime years, 2005 to 2000, maybe 19, 20. It was like an aquarium. And a lot of people said, do you charter? Do you charter? Do you charter? And I got it in my head, hey, maybe I should start chartering because eventually I may want to quit work and this would be a great career to introduce as the second phase of my professional life. And
Right.
that's what wound up happening.
Okay, so is Jigging Jerks the name of your charter?
It's not. The name of
Okay,
the charter is Just Fishing Charters, and
just
it's a
fishing charter.
play on the little jingle that often accompanies the intros to my videos. where it's a little medley, and then it
Right,
goes
right.
jigging jerks, jigging jerks, jigging jerks, just fishing. So I thought it was a decent name, and it sort of tied back to jigging jerks.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that you mentioned that period, 2005, that's a little before I started seriously fluking. When I started, it was in Raritan Bay, and that might have been 2013, 2014. And yeah, the fishing back then, even all the way out west, was remarkable compared to what it is now. And it definitely dropped off. So I got my first kayak in 2016, and then by 2018, pretty noticeable drop off in the fluke fishery, at least.
For
Um,
sure.
yeah,
For sure. And I mean, we all have theories about that. I'm sure you do. My theory that I will go to my grave with is, the fluke spawn offshore in the wintertime. They go to the continental shelf, and I strongly believe that the commercial fleet has figured that out, and they're absolutely ravaging the big fluke in the winter months. There's a downstream effect with that, where
yeah.
the recreational
No,
guys are seeing less and less fish.
yeah, there's no question that that's the case. Everyone is getting better at locating fish, and that includes the commercial guys. Probably is a combination of factors. I mean, the whole population is shifting. You would expect to see pockets of abundance and then fish kind of in between spots from year to year. I was going to have Charles Whittick on, who knows a lot about fishery science and regulations and stuff like that, but we might not get to him until this winter. In any case, in terms of the Montauk fishery, is that where you started fluking? Like you
No,
mentioned, and okay, so
no. So I never fluked growing up. We caught a lot of flounder, winter flounder
right,
as a kid. This is going to be one of those stereotypes about Greeks. Greeks love their porgies, and
right,
it's true, right? We grew up. I had uncles with boats, and that was the big thing. We would go porgy fishing, and then blackfish too. We blackfished in the
right.
fall, but mostly porgies. Never went for striped bass. Never went for fluke. I did a lot of shore fishing back then, off the jetties, off piers, and we'd catch everything. But never really targeted fluke. I didn't start targeting fluke till the early 2000s, where a good buddy of mine had a boat on the Peconic Bay side, in Eastern Long Island, and I fell in love. The first time I went fluke fishing, I was like, "This is the way. This is fishing."
Right, right. I mean,
And
Peconic Bay, that's still pretty far east. I mean, you're
that it's right near where I
yeah,
live.
right.
Um, I'm in Eastern Long Island on the North Fork of Long Island, and Peconic Bay is the body of water between the towns of Riverhead to Orient on the north and the Hamptons to Montauk on the south. And that used to be the mecca of springtime fluke
Yes.
fishing. I know there's videos out there from the mid 2000s. There was Northeast Angling. I don't know if you ever remember that TV show with Captain
Yes.
Rich and, oh, I forgot the other captain's name, but they did a whole episode in Peconic Bay, and it's amazing how many fluke they caught, and
W-
it brought back a lot of memories
Right. And
of
back
those
then,
trips.
the spring fishery in Peconic Bay, was that mostly a squid driven bite?
It was because
Right. Yeah.
we would go down to the railroad docks in Greenport at night with lights and a battery, and we could load up a full cooler with squid in one night.
Nice. And does that not happen anymore? Is that
It does not happen as far as I know. I keep saying every year that I'm gonna get and it's funny, we're chatting, what day is it? I know it's not gonna be published today. We're chatting early April. John Skinner published a video yesterday where he was promoting an underwater squid type light, portable light that folds open. And I'm
okay?
watching the video and I'm thinking, I need to get that. I have to try at night for squid off the boat. I can, so after, at a certain point for security concerns, they cut off a lot of the good access to some of the public spots that we used to squid fish from. But certainly there's nothing stopping you from, taking your boat to some of those areas, dropping that light and those squid jigs and seeing if there's anything there. What I understand from the local commercial fishermen is that they still do come in, but not at the numbers we used to see.
Right, and therefore it would make sense that the large bodies of fluke don't really follow them in like they used to.
Maybe it's interesting because the striped bass still come in. The weak fish showed up in bigger numbers than ever, during this time
Right.
of the slowdown of the fluke in Peconic Bay. So I don't know. I can't wrap my head around that that's the only reason. The other big theory, of course, for Peconic Bay is that they started spraying for mosquitoes, and it's a small body of water, a narrow body of water, and all that spraying on those lawns that jut into Peconic Bay did something to either kill off the bait or
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but that's another big theory that the locals throw out.
Right. Right. Yeah, because I remember reading on Northeast Forum. I don't know if you remember that
Of
forum.
course.
Yeah, and people talking about, page upon page of how to rig a whole squid rig for the Peconic Bay spring fishery.
Roger,
And
it was amazing. It was amazing. And it was right in my backyard. I mean, literally my boat was docked in Greenport in Sterling Harbor, and I could be in front of Claudio's fluke fishing in under 5 minutes.
so how deep are we talking for that spring bite?
So this is where fishing with you last year and talking to you when watching your course, taking your course, I think it's going to change some of my approach this year. It was always a deep bite.
Okay.
Probably the shallowest spot we fished was 30 feet, and there are spots like right outside Claudio's by the green lawns in the channel in Greenport. These are different spots that, not to be confused. I know I said them rapid fire, where we could be in 80 feet of water. And in
Wow.
fact, last year, my boat wasn't delivered yet last year, opening day, and I fished on Skinner's little boat, and we were fishing 50 to 60 feet, and we wound up with like, I don't know, 20 shorts, which was encouraging. I don't think we got keepers. I could be wrong. Maybe we had one or two. I don't remember. Um, but we were deep. Now, I have some spots that I have some mud spots, put it that way. And I want to try like a light quarter ounce jig with one of the jerk shads. I
Oh
want to
yeah.
like I want to actually spot lock on those spots this spring. Um, and fan cast and do the retrieve that you showed me and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I think that would be a great, I mean,
Maybe we'll get you on the boat, Roger. This way I
there you
can
go.
I can access
There you
the
go.
knowledge of the best at that
No,
for
no, the
that.
yeah, the early season fishery, I don't know if it translates at all, but what I noticed is when they first come in from the ocean, when they're still covered in lice, they tend to be in the deeper part of the channel. And then within a week or two, they start spreading out shallow. And then once they start finding the grass shrimp, at least, this is like Back Bay and rivers in Jersey and Western Long Island, then you can find them less than 5 feet. But before that, when they first get here, they do come in via the deeper channels. But deep here is like 20 feet, 25 feet, so it's
Yeah,
all
that's
relative.
shallow for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. That's,
Peconic Bay is a really deep, deep bay.
yes. Yeah. That's very interesting. Now, speaking of your boat, so you're saying that the boat you're currently conducting your charters on now, you got delivery of it last year.
Right.
Right. So the
That's the
boat
boat
that
you fished on last
right,
year.
right. And it's a beautiful boat. Can you
Thank you.
go in a little because I know nothing about boats. I know it's a catamaran hull and it rides very differently than a
What did you
traditional.
think of the ride?
I thought it was remarkable. I mean, it wasn't that rough that day,
No.
but I remember you taking us over some chop that I was bracing for, a little bit of airtime, and it just rode right over them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, all boats have their trade-offs. So if we had gone striper fishing, and I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about stripers too,
of
because I'm really
course,
excited about that this spring. Um, cats have this tendency in if they get hit by short space deep chop, like where some of the rips we fish have that, they tend to what's called snap roll, which is this.
I
A
see.
very exaggerated, fast, and kind of scary, but the gunnels are high, so you're not gonna fall out. Um, but yeah, the cat ride, and I'm gonna sound like a broken record because I talk about this a lot in my videos.
Okay.
It's an amazing ride compared to a monohull. You have two thin hulls slicing through the water instead of one kind of rounded hull. They just absorb the chop so much better. So my boat is by a small company in Fort Pierce, Florida. It's called Eastward. They've been around now since I think 2019, but they actually imported a mold from Australia. They imported the mold of a boat called a Kevlar. And they built two models only, a 24 and a 30 footer. I have the 24. And Australia has all those bars, they're called, those breaking waves.
Right.
And if you are an Australian boat brand, you're pretty much built to be in rough water. And I did a factory tour. I saw how the boats were made. They were very simple, utilitarian. I didn't want bells and whistles. I didn't want fancy things that would break. And yeah, I put a deposit down that day, and I had a great boat. I had a 32-foot CV, which folks that know boats know that that's a very premium brand. And it was a great boat. It had a lot of great trips on it. But it wasn't exactly economical. And, it was at that point, in 2024, it was 19 years old. And I was ready to move on to something newer, something that would have maybe fewer things breaking, what felt like a lot, especially from a business perspective. It was a great boat, but a 20-year-old boat, little things go,
Right.
electrical components, engine stuff. And to be constantly laid up because of boat issues was not fun.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That boat, that we went out on, it was, again, I don't know much about boats, but 10 out of 10 in terms
Yeah,
of
thank you,
comfort,
Roger. I
ride.
appreciate that,
Yeah.
buddy.
And you obviously have the spot lock trolling motor on the front of the boat. Now, how much does that change your fishing?
I use it every single fluke trip, and I will argue that it's more critical to my fluke business than it is to my blackfish business. Because at the end of the day, you could drop an anchor,
Yes.
and for years, right, we used anchors, and do a great job on the blackfish. The fluke fishing is so much harder than the black fishing. The black fishing is like porgy fishing to me. Once you figure it out, there's so many of them. At least by us, where I am.
Right, right,
I know other like Western Sound guys will argue that the fishing sucks, but by us, it's fantastic. There isn't one trip where I don't use that trolling motor for fluke fishing. To me, the most critical detail with the type of fluke fishing we do in the deeper water is the presentation, is being on the right drift line, matching the speed to the drift, keeping anglers as vertical as possible as you're drifting, and you're drifting the correct way. And the trolling motor allows that. I have a hummingbird screen on my boat, which talks to the trolling motor, which is a Minn Kota, and I can literally plot a line, hit go, and it will stay on that line. And then I control the speed.
right.
So on a day where you might have wind against tide and, guys on other boats might be using, chicken rigs with 10 ounces or 12 ounces, we could be dropping with 3 ounces and not scoping and
Yeah,
just
that's
following
such
the
a
line. And
huge.
and
Yeah,
that's the most critical thing to me, presentation, just
yeah,
being able to naturally to match. what the bait underneath the boat is doing naturally. And the bait is not swimming against a strong current. They're going with it, and the fluke are set up, staring in that direction, waiting to pick off the bait. And I think I
Yeah.
think the results show there's we catch a lot of big fish. I wish it was like it was, 5, 6 years ago where there were a lot of fish, or 7 years ago at this point, even, geez. Um, and there were a lot of fish in general. But all things considering, we
No,
do
there's
pretty good on big fish.
oh for sure. And there's enough fish for people to find them if you know what you're doing. And I think that's very like I mentioned this in one of my videos last year just wrapping up the season cuz we stayed in touch and the middle of summer last year I understand wasn't the best season for you guys, but you ended it strong. I mean, you caught some giants.
We had a great season from like late August through a lot of September.
Right.
And it seems, and you and I might have talked about this on the boat. We had that what's it called? The upwell. I've already
Yeah.
forgotten. We had that like long stretch of south winds last year, and it apparently it's some kind of maritime phenomenon. When that happens, the the top of the water column warms up, but the bottom of the water column gets cold or stays cold. And I mean, it's like the fish had lockjaw. They weren't there. Even when you caught them, they were lethargic. You would drop them. They would spit hooks. They would come up to the deck ice cold when you did catch them. And then we had a few days of north wind, I remember, in mid-August, and all of a sudden the fishery turned on. So I
So
think it
interesting.
leads a lot of credence to that theory that last year hopefully was an aberration
Yeah.
because of that weather phenomenon. We'll see this year whether that's true or not.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the spot lock, I always felt because on my kayak, I fish from a Hobie kayak, which has these pedals. Um, if you gave me a paddle kayak, like one that doesn't have these kind of foot controls, I would rather
Mhm.
fish from shore for almost any species because the ability to hold yourself stationary or create your own drift line is so huge.
Yeah,
If you're fishing structure, freshwater, saltwater, it doesn't really matter. If you're just drifting and dreaming, then that's one thing. But that's not really the way to dial these bites in.
agree 100%.
Yeah.
And again, I do believe that that's what makes fluke fishing so great. It really is. It really is the most challenging of the fishes that I fish for. Now, I get it. If you're tile fishing or tuna fishing or, things I don't really do,
Right.
that probably is harder. But from a, porgies, blackfish, striped bass, bluefish, perspective, the fluke are the toughest. They're never in the same spot 2 days in a row. Everything has to be set up right. Sometimes, one color is working with Gulp and another isn't. There's so many variables, and there really is this feeling of accomplishment when you're able to, on a trip, dial them in, figure out where they are, and catch them.
Yeah, and I also feel like fluke because they literally live on top of structure, like they live on the bottom. They're very patternable, like you're able to unlock the pattern for fluke the way that you can't really do for truly pelagic species. Like I can't imagine tuna being a fish that you can pattern with any consistency. Like they might stay in an area, but they're there because the bait are there.
Right.
And I guess fluke is the same way, but they travel along the ocean floor. And in my opinion, they have very predictable path moving in and out of an area. And if you know what to look for, like I know JT does a lot of
Yeah.
contour studies and map studies. That certainly. And one thing I wanted to talk about is, as a captain of a boat, and I feel this just even in my kayak, because when I launch my kayak, I have a lot of decisions to make. Like I can cover about maybe 6 to 10 miles in my kayak just pedaling around, versus when I'm on foot, the decision is really, do I go north or south if I'm in Jersey, right? And then I'm fishing what's in front of me, and I can focus on my techniques and the presentation. But in terms of finding the fish, in a boat, you have almost limitless range. So therefore, it's that to me is such a huge part of it. Where
But we also have a much bigger area to cover.
exactly, so
So
it's like, you if you go to one spot, then you're not checking another spot, and these
this is where it
decisions.
pays to have a network. So
Yes.
like there's many, and I have a bunch of videos talking about this where you know, we always know somebody else out on the water. And the stupidest thing you can do is both go to the same spot.
Yes.
You talk about it beforehand. JT and I do this all the time. My buddy Doc and I do it all the time. Another friend of ours, Rick, we do it all the time. You go here, we'll go there. Let's stay in touch. And then between the two boats, you'll obviously try more than one spot, and hopefully one boat finds where they are that day and lets the other boat know. And it's nuts. I mean, there's a video I have, I think 2 or 3 years ago, where we stopped at one of my random spots. We weren't catching fish anywhere, and we landed on a great bite. This is in Montauk on the south side. And I radioed Rick because we were staying in touch. My buddy Rick, who's got a 32-foot aluminum boat. And Rick's boat is very distinguishable. He pulled up next to us. We're talking, and a couple boats are driving by. They see us talking. They see him set up on a drift. They set up on the drift. Then a party boat set up, and I kid you not, within a half hour, there were like 30 boats on this
Oh
one little
yeah.
piece.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful about that too.
It's
I'm sure you
almost.
do this too on the
Oh,
kayak, but
bro.
no screaming. Well, last year we had a trip where we had an almost 10 pounder where you and I fished. I'm not going to say where. Um, and my guys were screaming, and there was a party boat about 2 miles away, but very distinguishable. I saw it. It was a red party boat. I'll just leave it at that. And next thing you know, they're right on top of
Oh
us.
yeah, they're like fluke rigs are flying over your head, right? It's I mean, look, in my kayak in freshwater, and some of these lakes that I fished, they're not very large lakes. And it took me maybe 2 or 3 seasons to figure out where my smallmouth winter. So what smallmouth bass do is once they hunker down, they basically stay there, until ice out. And I only fished for those fish 3 times. It was completely epic. But I
Wow.
stopped because the only time I could fish for them is when there's no one in that half of the lake. Like the last thing I need is for someone to be crossing the lake, seeing me in the middle of nowhere. 'Cause this is all offshore fishing. These fish are not on the bank, and wondering, just coming by to see exactly what I'm doing. And those fish need to be returned immediately because they're coming out from the deep. No live well, no like 5 minute photo shoots. Those fish will go belly up.
Right.
So yeah, I mean look, where we live, I mean me more so than you, it's there's so many people. So
Yeah.
you really
Yeah.
have to be mindful. But when you're talking about network, I have my own network just from shore fishing, and there are people that I talk to almost every day that I might see once a year because we send each other to different locations.
That's interesting you say that,
Yeah.
Roger, because you know, I'm gonna tell a story, a Skinner story about shore fishing. He wrote about this in his last book that he was on an epic nighttime bass bite in on some beach here in Long Island, and he saw a guy coming his way that he knew was a friend of his, and he reeled up and he walked the other way, walked by him. Yeah, nothing happening. Don't even bother here. Um, and my understanding from the surfcasting world is you will go to your graves with your spot. You won't share them with anybody.
Yeah. I mean the striped bass surf casting world. I mean it's starting to become like everything else, people chasing bites on Facebook and whatnot. But traditionally, yeah, I mean you do not want to be the person to blow up a spot, a bite, anything. And that's one of the reasons. I mean, it's not really because I have very little interest in striped bass fishing as it is now. Um, but yeah, even if I did all of a sudden get into striper fishing, probably won't see any videos from that.
Yeah.
Like
Then why don't you like striper fishing?
it's not. I mean, it's just an opportunity cost. Like when the stripers are really in the spring and fall, that's really when either freshwater bass fishing or still focusing on fluke.
Got it.
You
Okay.
know, and it's just like like my brain can only focus on at least one species at a time, if not one or two techniques at a time. So, and then also just I think I would feel differently if I lived or fished like north, maybe like Rhode Island waters or the Connecticut side of Long Island, where, as far as I understand, those bass are more structure oriented, whereas the Jersey bass seem to be completely bait driven. So
Yeah.
all the blitzes you see, they're basically on peanut bunker or bunker, sometimes mullet, and it's just there's no really patterning that kind of bite. It's all blitz fishing, and that doesn't interest me very much.
So Roger, when we gotta get together early spring, I wanna take you to a spot in Peconic Bay where we catch stripers, and so they can get decent size, not crazy big, but
Mm,
they can get okay with really light bucktails, light rods,
nice,
very similar to what you do for fluke. Not
nice,
exactly the same, not the hard jerks, but very similar where you're casting parallel to a rip. And the hit is amazing. I think it'll open your and it's very predictable, right?
right?
It's not predicated on finding bait. So we got
No,
to get together early May because that's the perfect time for that, where we can get a combo fluke striper day in.
for sure, for sure. The so let's talk about striped bass in terms of your charter business. Do you charter for bass
So
before fluke
historically, I
season?
never did, but
Okay,
last year, last year was my first year doing the chartering full time. I had left my company after almost 20 years in March, and I decided, you know what? Let me do this full time. Let me try it. And it best decision I ever made.
nice,
I had a bunch of trips. They were great. Um, and yeah, I have quite a few trips booked this year for striped bass.
nice,
What I'm really excited about this year, I did a lot of fishing in Florida this year, and for the first time ever, and when I fish in Florida, I'm on the Gulf side. I'm not on the Atlantic side, even though where I stay is on the Atlantic side. But all my friends, John Sweeney, Doc, my buddy Walter Watkins, Skinner, they're all on the West Coast. So we go out 50, 60 miles into the Gulf. And the way we used to do it is we would spend an hour, sometimes longer, catching bait. It's just part of the DNA of Gulf Florida fishing.
right,
And you go to these spots where the grouper live, you drop the bait, the live bait down, and you wait to get a hit. I have another good friend, James Diotti, who's like a slow pitch jigging madman, and we did a trip with him in December, a charter for American Red Snapper, and in the first drop, he's using a slow pitch rod with a jig. He catches a beautiful black grouper, which I'd never seen a black grouper caught before. Um, and I was hooked. And I said, you know what? I'm going to get some jigs for the next trip I go out on in the Gulf. And it got to the point I started really using these nomad jigs called squidrixes. And again, Skinner's talked about them in his recent videos, but the truth is we were using them and he saw us catching with them and
nice.
and he's using bait and not catching. And so he started using them now too. But I'm dying to try those for sea bass and striped bass. They have a very erratic movement. I don't know if they'd work for fluke. I think they might, but
I think
I'm
so.
I'm I'm more I really want to try them um for striped bass. I think I can't imagine that they wouldn't work, especially in sea bass too, because sea bass are stupid like grouper. They'll hit anything. But I think they'll fool striped bass too. They look really realistic when you're dropping them down the water column. They have a very erratic zigzag drop. Very reminds me, even though it's completely different, reminds me a lot of fishing with a flutter spoon, where the flutter spoon has that erratic fall, looks like an injured bunker, mullet, or
Right.
whatever. And it just triggers something in the big bass to hit it. I think it's going to be the same with this.
Yeah, I
So
mean
that's
that
my big exciting thing for this year with bass. I want to see if that works.
nice. Yeah, no, I remember when that bait came out. I mean, it made quite a stir. And it's a very well thought out bait. Just
It
even
really is.
the
The
assist
hooks
hooks.
can be bigger though. That's the only thing. You got to
Yeah,
change the
but you
hooks.
could change them out. That's
Yeah,
the
of
thing,
course.
I like baits where they're modular and you can change out the hooks. Like most plugs and what I don't like are very expensive swim baits where the hook is molded with the weight into the bait. Because with my OCD, like hooks are a completely disposable thing. Like I'll go out with jerk baits for Fluke and I'll bring a box of treble hooks with me. And after 5 or 6 fish, those treble hooks start losing their points. Um, but yeah, no, but that squid tracks, I think it's like it operates on the principle of a vibrating lipless crankbait, just where the line tie is, and then when you pull it, like it kind of does that vibration
It
upwards.
does. You feel it in the rod
Right, right.
when you're yo-yoing.
Yeah, they're
And
yeah,
to your point too about you think it would work for Fluke. Now I'm thinking of JT, right? JT Trolley, Nextdrift Fishing, and how, he loves to experiment and he experiments with crankbaits on Fluke. And, I don't want to steal his thunder, but it's very doable.
oh no, for sure. Although the squid tracks would be more like a jig for Fluke, like you would be popping it off the bottom and then letting it fall. I remember watching JT's video where he was using a sinker attached to a floating jerkbait, like a
Yep.
traditional jerk. I mean, not a jerkbait, but a crankbait with the bill, and that would definitely work as well. Yeah, yeah. We have to talk to JT. I know he has a big project coming up this year. Goals at least.
Yeah. Well, he's open about it. I
Yeah,
think he's open about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He
Like I
wants to
saw.
catch the world
Yeah,
record.
exactly. And I watched your live stream with him on that, where you guys I think did like a watching party of
Yeah,
nappies.
we the Charlie Nappy video, the he did like a seminar. And
Yes.
it's comically funny. If anybody's a fan of like the old UK Office, the TV show, the
Oh,
UK
huge fan.
version, they do you remember the training they did and they showed like an old 80s video with cheesy music?
Right.
That when I was watching this, I was like, this feels like David Brent at
Yeah,
Work
yeah.
Dog watching that training video. But yeah, that look, if there's anybody that I think can do it, it's JT, because he really studies that structure
Yes.
and and he catches a lot of big fish.
Yeah.
And I think
And it's
and I
not an
think his idea is sound.
right. And it doesn't seem to be an idol. I mean, look, in the back of a lot of people's minds, they're gonna go and catch the world record or the state record. He has a plan. I'm very excited. I mean, if if he has the time, I would love to talk to him
That's
before
going to be
or
the
after.
that's going to be the big thing because JT started a new job, a very lot of you and I chatted about this
Yeah.
after earlier in the day when we caught up on planning this session.
Hmm.
He's got a big job, new job, travels a lot, and as I know from personal experience, the one thing you need is time.
Yes.
When you're limited to perhaps just weekends and vacation time, and a lot of that is dependent then on the weather, you know,
Yeah.
it's hard.
It shrinks considerably, and I think for most people, I mean, that's kind of why we started the private lessons for Fluke. Because a lot of these techniques you develop over years, right? And there are shortcuts if you know the fundamentals. I did want to ask you because I heard when you and JT were talking about the world record pursuit that you did try the 8-inch Gulp grub.
Did multiple
And
times.
right. And how did you like the results? Were they,
Poor,
yeah,
poor. I don't know what to say. Um, so it's a little different where we fish, Roger, than what you're used to with the shallower stuff. We really do need the 6-inch grub. What happens if you go smaller typically, and you saw this with us, right? When we were using the jerk shots and the deep stuff, we were catching a lot of fish, just not the right ones.
right, right,
There's it, the waterways we fish are inundated with porgies and sea bass and sea robins, and man, it's like a calling card. They call each other, "Hey, we got jerk
right.
shots here, the small ones, come over." Um, so we tend to go with the bigger grubs. They seem to somewhat withstand. Not clearly, you're still going to catch sea bass and sea robins and porgies, but not to the extent that you would with the smaller artificials. But once you go up to that 8-inch, it's like they shut off. They don't want anything to do with it, and I don't understand why. Because certainly we've filleted fluke and sea bass and other fish with much bigger contents than an 8-inch gulp grub. So that one befuddles me. You would think it would work great, and I don't have an answer why it doesn't. Have you heard of anyone having success with it?
No, I bought a couple packs of them and I tried it for my kayak. What I noticed is you need almost double the amount of weight to get that tail moving on the fall.
Mm,
So on the 6-inch, it's about half ounce is the magic number. And it depends. Some of the colors or packs have a stiffer tail than others. But generally speaking, on the 6-inch grub, if you have a half ounce weight and you let your jig free fall, that tail will actually kick on the way down, and half ounce and over. But on the 8-inch, it doesn't really do anything until you go over an ounce, sometimes an ounce and a quarter. And I think that has something to do with it. But also just, all last year I threw big swim baits for freshwater bass. And the sizes, I was playing around with them. My biggest bass, like I caught my PB largemouth from shore, was a little over 7 pounds.
wow.
And that fish came on a 7-inch bait when I was throwing the 7-inch bait and also a 9.5-inch bait. So a 2-ounce bait and a 4.5-ounce bait, like alternating all year. The average size I was catching on the 7-inch bait was larger than the 9 to 10-inch bait.
That's interesting. You wow. Okay.
Yeah, and my theory is that I'm gonna get so many DMs for this, but it's there's there's a rule that basically says you want to go as big as you can to weed out smaller bites, but then no bigger. Because
Right.
when a fish goes after a prey item that's too large, there's risk involved for that fish. They can choke to death. It might take longer for them to eat that larger prey item, and then therefore they're more exposed to their own predators. And then the largest fish might be the more conservative fish in terms of their behavior,
Right.
and they're more risk averse. So they're looking for a large meal, but it comes to a point where if that meal becomes too large by an inch, then they kind of let it go.
That's about as good a theory as I've heard. Even the movement part, it could just be that it just doesn't move as well.
Yeah.
Maybe it'd be interesting if Berkeley maybe experimented with an 8-inch gulp that had a smaller, like a narrower profile, because they
Right.
really made it thicker too.
Yes. Yeah, because it's
Um,
because it's 2 inches in almost every dimension. It's not like 6 inches and they just tacked on two
2 inches.
inches.
Yep.
That's a lot of, well, I guess it's not plastic. It's a lot of whatever material that Gulp is made of.
Japanese soy, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
We,
it's it's kanji. It's konjac. That was the first iteration of Gulp. It's the same stuff that the shirataki noodles are made from. But I think they moved away from that. Someone posted their patent on one of the fishing forums a while back. But
yeah, a friend of mine, Michael March, the day I met him on the Hampton Lady, which was not the red boat I was talking about before, by the way, but uh, a Japanese yam. That's what
yeah,
he called one of his guys on the phone and said, "Yes, we looked at the patent. It's a Japanese yam." I was like, "What?"
yeah,
It sounded like so bizarre, but
yeah. That
but you
was
got to give Berkeley credit.
oh
No one. And look, I know some things work, right? That a lot of people swear by fish bites. Z-Man has a following because of how tough it is. I've personally, and I've tried a lot of them, have never remotely come close to replicating what Berkeley's done with
no,
the Gulp Alive.
and it really isn't close. I mean, okay, back then when Gulp first came out, they did have competitors like Rapala and Yoziri had their own. Yoziri had a product called Excitabite, and that
Okay, I
was
don't know about that one.
yeah, and that was made from a similar, like I'm sure it's also some kind of konjac powder, but that didn't, Berkeley invested both, I guess, on the R&D side and also the marketing side, and they just expanded that line. I remember catching Fluke on the Yozeri bait. Rapala had Trigger X, which was a walleye bait, and then they had a Trigger X saltwater. These are all baits that if you leave them out of the package, they will dry and kind of
Mm.
shrivel up. So they were similar to Gulp in that
Yeah.
way. But Gulp was the one that persevered,
Can
and
you imagine the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars Berkeley's made off Gulp?
it's unbelievable. And I
Just think
remember,
about the average fisherman, how the average fluke fisherman, how much we spend
oh
on Gulp
yeah,
every year, probably more than anything else
yeah,
in terms
for
of
sure,
gear, like
for sure. And
lures, bucktails, teasers, things like that,
oh
hooks.
yeah, and like you said, they're the only game in town. I mean, I was joking when I was on this other podcast that the Berkeley execs, when they were watching gulps fly off the shelves in the Northeast, they must have been like, what the hell is happening? Because they made that bait for walleye. That was what it was originally for. And someone figured out that Fluke will eat them. I mean, obviously, John Skinner popularized it.
Yeah, he's never taken credit for
Right, right.
inventing it, but for sure what you just
Oh,
said.
for sure. I mean, before Skinner, who knew? Maybe some Sharpies on Rhode Island party boats, like who knows, right? But, certainly both the high low and the gulp for Fluke.
So
And
so Gulp has never paid Skinner a penny for Berkeley hasn't. But indirectly, it has created the Skinner we know today
oh yeah,
because Skinner's YouTube channel only started because he was giving a talk at RISA, the Rhode Island Sport, whatever that acronym stands for, years ago. And he was catching back then using Gulp in the Long Island Sound.
yeah,
And he was telling these old timers at the show, yeah, you don't need bait. I don't use bait. And look at these fish I'm catching, and he's showing pictures. He didn't have video back then. And they were like, you're full of it. You're full of it. And he went out the next weekend with his kids and on his flip phone filmed it in action. And in order to get it to them, he created a YouTube channel and no intention of ever
right,
becoming what we know today, just to get, just as a ways to show these guys in Rhode Island
right.
how he's doing
Oh
it.
yeah. I
I,
mean,
I just think it's an incredible story. It's kind of like he became an accidental YouTuber. And then, down the line, so many people were watching the videos that at the time YouTube reached out to him and said, "Hey, you want to fill out some paperwork? We can get you monetized." And,
nice, nice. Yeah, I mean, I remember those early videos. He was on his previous boat,
yeah.
right? Like like,
3 boats ago. He has the
right.
Grumman now. He had the Starcraft before that, and he had another Starcraft, I believe it was before that. That wound up, you know, the engine died, and he found this one on the side of the road, the second boat, and then that one had the
Nice.
weld leak, and he wound up finding this one in Boston. But yeah, that was 3 boats ago for him.
Yeah, I mean that
The one thing in common, they were all old, decrepit-looking aluminum boats, and I say that with love.
I remember. Yeah, I mean the yeah. So that gulp craze, once it started, it's a completely different way of fluking than what most people. I mean, what there were people bucktailing for fluke, but that's like squid strip, maybe
Yeah,
Achille. I used to catch them on very light tackle, but slip sinker, like quarter ounce slip sinker, small hook, and Achille, and cast and drag it around. And I caught a lot
I
of fish.
I've been using bucktails way before a Skinner video ever popped up in my. I was on a really great, like, bigger charter boat, like mini party boat, but really a charter out here called the Nancy Ann. Captain Richie Jensen, one of the most knowledgeable captains in my area. This was back in like 2003, and I was using what everybody used back then, like a high-low setup, a chicken rig type setup, squid and spearing, and I broke off. We were having a great day. This is again, Peconic Bay on fire, springtime, and the mate says, "You need help rigging?" And I opened my tackle box. I'm like, "No, I'm just gonna." And he saw that I had bucktails in there for striper fishing, and he said, "Hey, you got bucktails. Why don't you try a bucktail?" I go, "For fluke? No way." And he's like, "No, here." And he tied what, now people call the Skinner rig. And again, he doesn't like that because he didn't create that. But a bucktail on the bottom, bare hook on top, squid spearing, and I outfished the boat that day doing that. And I've never looked back after that. I mean, it's just such a more effective way, in my opinion, to fish for them in deeper water than a chicken rig. But although I know a lot of people have success with chicken rigs, nothing against them.
Now,
Um,
can you define the chicken rig? Is that just a sinker on the bottom and a
yeah,
dropper loop up top?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I think having those two baits in the water definitely makes a difference because you're covering, like, not only there's more attraction on the bottom going on, but you're also covering two different points in the column.
Yeah.
And sometimes fluke wants to feed further up, and sometimes they want to attack something that's closer to the bottom.
But I've seen people try 3, and that has failed spectacularly.
Yeah,
So
no,
2 seems to be the magic number.
yeah, three, you start getting weird physics and weird action going on. I remember back then the high hook was very popular to tie like a lighter jig. So you'll have, like, maybe a 2 ounce on the bottom and then a half ounce up top. And then people will get tangled on itself if you don't tie it right. But yeah, I mean that's all deep water fluking for me. Like shallow water, I mean it definitely works, but that single jig works very well too.
So
And
I do a lot of single jig fishing in the ocean. When I'm chartering, if it's slow or there's not a lot going on, I'll take typically a lighter setup, lighter bucktail by itself, 10-pound braided line, and cast opposite wherever my guys are fishing. And I tell you, it again, going back to your theory maybe about a bigger fluke sometimes being a little more risk averse. There are plenty of big fish I've caught on 1 ounce, one
oh
and a
yeah,
half, 2 ounce bucktails on a small rod, plain small bucktail on the bottom, no teaser, less drag. I think you could probably, you know, jig it a little better too off the bottom. You can
oh for
maybe
sure.
be a little closer to the bottom. You're not scoping as much with the lighter line, less drag with the one bait as opposed to two. And a lot of people don't realize that too. It's a pet peeve of mine, the line size. Everyone, when I hear people are using 30 and 40-pound braid for fluke, I'm like, no, don't do that.
No,
You're gonna
that's
scope so much. Don't do that. Light
yeah,
line.
yeah, and plus
Um,
you're fishing deep, 90 feet. you're never going to be vertical. So you're talking over 100 feet of 40-pound braid. That's a lot of water resistance.
And Roger, let me tell you, one of the hangups of Block Island, Montauk, is you are fishing structure and you break off. And the guys in Jersey know this too, right? The guys that fish the ocean in Jersey, they're fishing, railroad cars and buses and all this really crazy structure, worse than what we have. When when I break off on a 10-pound setup, a 10-pound braid setup, I'm using 30-pound fluoro. Do you know how many times the rig breaks at the 30-pound fluoro and not the 10-pound braid? It's probably at least 60% of the time it breaks on the fluoro, not the braid. So what does that tell you? Like it's not
Oh
too
yeah.
light. It's
Yeah.
not, you're not going to have a big fluke break as long as you have your drag set right, obviously. You're not going to have a big fluke break off your braid. It's
No.
not going to happen.
No. Braid, well, my pet peeve with braid ratings in the US is it makes no sense whatsoever because the US went to a pound test rating that didn't match the actual breaking strength. So the rest of the world they use a GO system like a PE system which is a diameter system. And the more the more premium the line, the higher the breaking strength at that given, thickness.
Hmm.
So PE1 breaks at 22 pound in this one branded braid that I use. Here they're selling it as 8-pound braid. So the actual breaking strength is 22 pounds. If you go to 22 pounds in the US rating, the actual breaking strength is over 45.
I believe that.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. But yeah, you use 6, 8-pound braid, more than enough for fluking. You're not talking about a lot of shock, and your hook sets are nothing that's gonna break off. I mean, that's the only reason to go heavier is if that system is gonna experience a lot of shock at the hook set, or if these fish run very, very hard. Neither of which are really true for fluke. So, you definitely want the thinnest braid possible, even fishing in 10 feet of water, let alone 90 or 100. Um, yeah, so deep water fluking that you mostly do, like you said, 30 foot for you would be very shallow at any
Very
time of
shallow.
year.
N- Typically, no, just typically in the spring. Once we start migrating further east into Gardner's Bay and then the ocean, the shallowest we might go is 40.
Right,
We're close to the beach. Like we had some trips close to the beach last year, in the late summer that were really good, and that tends to be their migration pattern. Again, you like talking about the predictability of these fish. Um, that's one of the constants that we see that they're deep, 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 and then it seems like once we get that first offshore storm.
yeah.
They start that's their trigger that they have to start feeding for their, continental shelf winter time. And they come close to the beach and they really gorge themselves. And last year we saw tremendous, tremendous marine life close to the beach, late August into September. Whales and sharks and dolphins and bunker and I mean it was quite a show. It was amazing to see.
What what was the primary forage that they were eating along the beach?
A lot of sand eels.
Okay,
I don't know. I think there's a lot of peanut bunker too, but don't hold me to that. It's the same thing that draws the albies typically in at that time. It always seems
right.
to coincide with the first albie run in Montauk. So when you see albies in Montauk, but last year too, around that time, we saw bluefin tuna busting near the boat. Which again was that's how much bait was in Montauk late
Right.
in the season last year.
Yeah, it's probably
The
just
football size, not monsters, but still, I'd never seen that before last year. Multiple times I saw it.
nice. Yeah, I mean the tuna fishing. I was talking to Seamoney about that because he's up in Rhode Island,
Yeah,
and I think they also fish block. So both coming out of Rhode Island, and then you guys from Montauk are, you could be fishing exactly the same area.
we could.
Yeah,
So it's easier for the Rhode Island guys because Block is part of Rhode Island.
right.
For me, in my boat's in Southhold in in the North Fork, Block Island is about a 45 to 50 mile run each way for me. So
Okay,
it's quite a run,
right.
but definitely doable on the right day. You don't want to go when you know it's going to be snotty out because that's a really long time to be
Yeah,
in not fun water. Um, the Rhode Island guys, it's a straight south shot. For me, it's more of a dead east run.
right, right.
Can we just give a shout out to C Money? Again, going back,
Of course.
wow, like 10 years now, how awesome. I think unintentionally awesome his videos were. It was like whatever can go wrong will go wrong. His kayak flips over as he's trying
Dude,
to beach it. A fluke pops out of his cooler as he's coming back in. He drops his pliers in the water. He forgets his net. I am sure none of that was scripted. It
no.
was just awesome, unintentional, great fishing fun. And C Money doesn't post anywhere near as much as he used to, but that those were great fun
Yeah,
videos.
that's starting to change. I mean, now that he's up in Rhode Island, he's definitely posting more. But
Way more than he was, but still
yeah,
not enough, I think.
yeah,
But
he
my
he
opinion only.
he pretty much see money now. 95% of what I watch on YouTube is like educational fishing, and most of it is, frankly, Japanese YouTube. Because I want to learn some freshwater technique. You know, the one of the only channels I watched just for entertainment was Sea Money Fishing. Because
Very entertaining.
he is a complete one off. And like you said, it's just him with his
It's
GoPro.
unintentional. I'm
Yeah,
convinced he's not doing, it's not a shtick.
no, it's
That's
definitely
just
not.
him being him. And
Yeah,
I don't know the man from a hole in the ground. So this is, if he's doing this intentionally, he deserves an Oscar or an
no,
Emmy or
yeah,
whatever the acting awards are,
exactly.
because it comes across as so genuine, like
Yeah,
not intentional. I don't know how else to describe it. And for the young people listening to this or watching this on YouTube, if you look up Sea Money Fishing and you go back about, I don't know, 8, 10 years to some
I
of those
mean,
early videos,
yeah, those are
you'll see what
classic
we're talking
videos.
about.
I mean, yeah, like I said, his channel was one of the only ones that I don't really care about catfishing or whatever kind of fishing that
Yeah,
he's doing.
exactly. I didn't
But
care about that, but
yeah,
I'd watch it.
exactly, because it's hilarious the things that happen to him, and then the things that he kind of makes happen. You know, I think he knows a lot about fishing, but he's a very instinctive kind of angler. I think it, Elias is that way to a certain extent, but I think Elias is more technical, whereas Sea Money just kind of finds himself around fish. He's very fishy in that way, and then the
Do you remember the
things,
bacon?
yes, the bacon,
God, I can
yeah,
still see his hands putting it on,
yeah, yeah, no,
cutting it with the scissor. Oh, those were great videos. I miss that type of content from him.
yeah. That's
Was a
like
lot of
that's
fun.
old YouTube, and I
Yeah.
understood because he walked away when he had 100,000 subs
Can you believe that? He
back in
was
like
at the height of his
2019.
popularity.
Yeah,
He
and
was probably the biggest out of like Skinner, Elias, Fishaholic. I'm talking about in like this Northeast
yeah,
salt,
right,
the kind of
right,
fishing we're talking about today.
right.
And yeah, he just disappeared, man.
Yeah, and it was completely organically grown. Like as far as I know, I don't remember him, asking for followers or doing any contests or anything like that. It was just people
Correct.
clicking on his videos and then liking what they saw. And the reason he walked away is he he was starting to see just too much pressure at the spots that he was fishing. And back then he was mostly a land-based angler. Um, and I completely respect that because he recognized that he was responsible putting people in these places and he was like, I can't do it anymore. Now that he's up in Rhode Island and he has his own boat and he started his own charter business, that's a different story, right? But when you're going spot to spot around Philly, South Jersey, I mean, there's a lot of
I
people.
still remember him in those like marshy areas, fluke fishing in
Yes.
like Jersey, Delaware, Philly, that area.
Yeah.
He was coy about it, but you knew it was somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
I'm having nostalgic memories of really
Yes.
enjoying those videos. I need to maybe go back and watch some of his old stuff because it was really
Yeah.
entertaining.
There's like a highlight reel of sea money fishing would be a very long video.
It would.
Yeah,
It would.
he definitely had a lot of gold.
Did you ever watch Romo Kayak? That was another
Yes.
favorite of mine.
Yes.
Because he was friends with those guys too, but his channel never got as big as any of their channels. But he was reminds me a little of you, Roger, because he was more like thoughtful. Um, you know, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And the thing I remember with Romo is they were fishing, I think somewhere upstate, and Elias had a huge, I want to say trout or maybe a salmon, and Romo tried to net it like 5 times,
I
and eventually
remember
the
this.
fish broke off, and Elias wouldn't stop talking about it for like multiple videos.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, well, that's the curse of the net, man. That's a lot of pressure. Now, I know watching some of your videos or Skinner's videos, when that fluke starts coming up from 80 feet, there's a lot of pressure, right?
Listen, not on the net man. It should never be on the net man. That is totally the angler, and that's what people don't understand. I get criticized a lot in videos. Look, I have no issues netting fish. You have to just trust me on that. The problem is when people bring the fish up, their first reaction is stop. No,
Exactly.
you never. You watch Skinner do it. Skinner's a pro at driving. I think I'm good at it too. You drive that fish into the net. Hard stop,
Yep.
it's over. You will never lose a fluke if you do it the right way. When anglers bring that fish up and they just stop, that gives that fish an opportunity to get its bearings, to start thrashing around, to swimming backwards. We've seen that too.
Yep. Yep.
And that's how you lose fish.
Yeah.
And 99% of the time, it's not the net man, it's the angler.
No, 100%. And when I used to fish a lot of party boats, I've seen it so many times. And those poor mates get blamed. They get shorted on their tips, and they're trying to net from 12,
Very high
13.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I remember one time this fluke must have been, I mean, it had to be over 8 pounds, if not 10. And it was a raging current. The guy was at the tip of the pulpit, so he was really high up, and he was dragging the fish in. Like that fish was planing on top of the water, and the mate
Wow.
had his net out on tiptoes, right? The head of the fluke clears the rim of the net, and the guy just kind of went slack, and that fluke popped right off. Um, and we saw the whole
I
thing.
I started and I caught a lot of flack for this and I've stopped doing it, but I still think I should be doing it to be honest, but it's not worth the ridiculous comments you get. I would grab the end of the rod and just do it myself into the net. Just grab the person's rod
Yeah,
and drive the fish into the net. And then we lost the fish doing that, and I got,
yeah,
you
no,
never do that. But at some point, people don't understand. It's deceptive on the GoPros. You physically can't reach out that far. And if
exactly.
people don't drive the fish in, what are you going to do? You can't do anything. You can only explain to them. And people have this tendency, I think, of like trying to back up or pull their rod towards their body. No, you just swing it sideways, like a
Yeah,
backhand tennis motion, and you'll or forward, depending on the angle with the net and the rod. Um, but I've gotten to the point now where when people are bringing the fish up, I'm trying as best I can to coach them and say, okay, listen, when that fish is just below the water, when we can see it, don't let them out of the water. Just start. I'm going to have the net on this side. Just swing your rod sideways, drive that fish into the net. And 9 times out of 10, it becomes a hassle-free netting.
yeah, no, that's the most important thing is the angler keeping up that momentum until the fish is in the bag of the net.
Yep.
Not just the head clearing the rim of the net when the whole fish is in. Um, yeah, that's always a heartbreak when you see a big fish lost that way. Um, but yeah, party boat mates, man, they
That's a thankless job.
that's a
It
thankless
really
job
is.
for sure. But yeah, I mean that's how I cut my teeth, when I was party boat fluking in Raritan Bay. The Misty Morn, Captain John, those boats fish mostly inside the bay and it's pretty shallow. And like I said, back then, 2014, 15, 16, the fluking was good. Not as many big fish as you guys get out east, but in terms of limits, like I remember my first like triple limit back then was 8 fish. You
Wow.
know,
That's insane.
yeah,
So
on
you
a
caught 24 fish.
24, but that was both morning and night trip.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Still,
so
very
I was there,
impressive in one
right. So
day.
so so that was like a full day of fishing, and it
But
was
that was what we saw last year here, the bays. I couldn't believe the combat fishing. And it makes you wonder how many friggin' fluke are out there. We were on a big party boat, literally on top of so many other boats. Like you could have a
yeah,
conversation with a small boat right next to you, and everybody was catching. It was unfriggin' believable.
yeah, that was a large body of fluke. I mean that's a lot of pressure, and that's a lot of boats. If you go on the weekend, forget it. It's if you get a nice weather on a weekend day, and these boats they follow each other around. The party boat captains are pros, so they know where to go. But the rest of the boats, I mean, it is. I remember in in Raritan Bay just watching everyone follow the
Yeah.
Misty or Captain John around, and it's like a mother goose with all her ducklings.
We see that in Montauk. The Captain Jamie has the Miss Montauk, very distinguishable blue boat, big blue
Hmm.
boat. And I swear it's like mother hen and her geese. When he picks up and starts moving, you will always see like four, five, six recreational boats right behind him.
Yeah,
Like no shame.
no
No
shame, none,
shame.
none. Yeah, I mean, look, it makes sense as a strategy. I mean, it's like how parasites evolved. I mean, it
Yeah,
makes sense.
you're
If
right.
you're only out there a handful of times a year, you're not finding your own fish,
You're
right?
right. You're right.
So if you see a party boat, I mean, that guy's out there like every day. He's got a logbook that goes back 30, 40 years. Like he knows how to find those fish. So,
In many ways, it's like you have a technique, right, that you've mastered using Gulp. When people emulate that, do you get mad at them? No,
I want people to do that. I mean,
right,
but
right.
that's a little different from,
I know it's a little
yeah,
different,
it's a little
but
different from turning around and you
yeah,
can't turn your party boat because there's I mean, that's,
yeah. No, agree, agree. It's not quite the same, but
right, right.
I know I've talked to Jamie about it online a couple times. He hates that. Um, but I'd be proud. Like
Yeah.
I get it. I don't want people doing that. I've had we had a couple big fish in a certain area last year, and a couple boats have come up to me. They watch the videos and they're like, "Hey, we got a 9 pounder here yesterday. Thank you. I saw you fishing here." And I'm like, "That's where he's fishing." So it feels good when they say that, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword. Your ego is one
Yeah.
thing, but
Yeah,
your
spots.
clients,
Yeah, spots. I have no. I mean, look, if people can recognize things from my videos, th- the only places they really could is places that I don't really. I mean, not that I don't care about them, but there's no point even hiding. It's like if I'm fishing a community spot where everyone knows, and I, show like a bridge piling. That's because, otherwise most of my videos, the editing is down to like, I'm just looking at the water, which
yeah.
is, it's a trade off. It doesn't make the most inviting looking video.
I know what you mean because I do that with blackfish
Yeah.
videos
But
where
what
I
can you
really
do?
crop and zoom to try to keep
Yeah.
some landmarks away as
Yeah.
best I
Yeah.
can,
And I used
and
to get a
the
lot more
video quality
comments.
sucks.
Yeah. Like I used to get a lot more comments than I do now. I think now it's been long enough that most of my viewers understand like this is a necessary thing because not just my spots, other people fish those spots too, and I get comments from people down south who are like, I don't believe in spot burning. I'm like, well, that's nice. Like you must have a lot more areas where you can spread out and fish, and there's fish everywhere. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if you're from this area and you don't understand, how it's important to protect landmarks and spots, you're pretty casual when it comes to fishing. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But just understand that if that's someone's passion, that's someone's hobby, they spend time to find these locations, to pattern things out. The last thing you want is people showing up, not just in terms of the crowding, but losing access to spots. Like a lot of these shore spots, there's maybe 3 or 4 parking spots, right? And
Yeah.
and I mean that's a big thing with striper guys, because they're fishing at night, and now you get all these town, ordinances that are closed off
That's
because
what's happened out here. They've
yeah,
closed so much of the public parking out here, or the parking areas out here, because a lot of the beaches have become overrun with, out of towners coming in because, they've seen a video or they heard about on social media a hot bite in Greenport, in Southold, in Orient. And yeah, the people that live here and could care less about fishing, they pisses them off something huge.
yeah, like you have to be somewhat discreet about it, and not that I go anywhere off limits for Fluke, because for Fluke you don't really need to, but the idea is the same. There's just too many eyeballs on every single. And look, if you want information that way, if you don't have the time or you're not willing to put in the work, go on Facebook. People are spot burning on Facebook, Instagram, 24/7 during the fishing season. There's places you can go to get that kind of fix.
So this is what always amazes me, Roger, when I'm down in Florida and we're 60 miles out in the Gulf grouper fishing. You might go a whole 5, 6 hours without even seeing another boat.
Yeah,
There's so many spots out there. You see no landmarks, no land, unless we're fishing a tower, obviously.
right.
But it's so different. And we've had some trips where we've caught so many fish without another boat within 10 miles of us. And I keep thinking, if this was like Montauk or, Rhode Island, you would have a fleet of boats here if
Yeah,
they knew the bite was here. And it just doesn't happen there.
for sure. I mean, I would imagine the options in Florida in terms of fishing is just so much more massive in terms of species, inshore, offshore.
More species for sure. I got to tell you though, Roger, I will go to my grave saying this. I would never trade what we have here for what they have there, ever.
I
It's great
think,
to escape, get out
yes,
of the cold weather for a few months if you can, if you're lucky enough, like I am, and some other friends of mine are. But would I ever want to live there? Absolutely not. I did for my family a little drone comparison video of like South Florida where we are versus where we are here in Long Island, and you, it just the smog, the pollution, the houses on top of each other, even though it looks like paradise, and then you come out here and the bucolic setting and the hills
oh
and
yeah, the
the
landscape,
cliffs over the water of the
yes,
Long Island Sound. It's night and day there. And this is not a knock on people who live there. That's where you live. I get it. But I would never trade this for that, ever.
yeah,
It's great to escape for a few months, but permanent, never.
yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, even the fishing, to be quite honest, if you mix both fresh and salt water, like we have some pretty good fishing opportunities here. But I always felt a fun trip would be hitting every toothy flounder species out there.
Mm.
Like I mean, just around the world, even like there's a toothy flounder in India that
Wow.
looks like a vampire flounder.
But you'd have to go to India to do that.
Yeah, so that
I
most
I
likely
I
would
kid
never
to our
happen.
Indian friends, but India is not a country high on my wish list to
No,
visit only
I
because of
think
the
our
travel
Indian
videos I've
friends,
watched.
yeah,
It looks like a miserable experience.
yeah, but Indians
Norway
here,
has giant halibut. I had a colleague in Germany at my old company who had actually during COVID, right when COVID started, the trip got canceled because of COVID, is the long and short of it. But he had sent me links to videos of giant friggin' halibut in
Yeah,
Norway.
those are the Atlantic halibut. And people here catch one or two a year,
Yeah,
as far as
Rick's
I can.
buddy. I did a couple videos on a 28 Freeman and a boat, a 23 contender for sale. That my buddy Rick, his friend Sandy, who lives in Cape Cod and also has a home in the Keys, up in Cape Cod, 2 or 3 times a year in very deep water, he catches halibut while targeting other species.
Right.
Which to me would be like, why is nobody targeting them? I guess people do target them. But I guess they're also, maybe it's kind of like how we catch monkfish.
Yeah, there's
It's
only
a
like
very happy accidental
yeah,
bycatch.
yeah. Like I remember when my uncle was big on cod jigging, his dream was always to pull up a halibut on one of those cod trips out of New Hampshire or something. Um,
Had
yeah,
you ever seen one caught on the boat?
he has not. I don't think he has. But the boats he would go on would catch, like I said, one or two a season,
Right.
and they're generally very big. I remember he used like an electric reel, and I always wondered if he hooked one, if those things actually have the balls to like pick him up from the deep. Um, but yeah, I mean the flatfish stuff, like in Europe, they have turbot, which is that diamond shaped fish, right? There's a toothy flatfish in every saltwater environment, which I always find fascinating. I mean, it's
Because they're adaptable.
exactly.
They can squeeze into the rocks, they can bury in the sand. They're very adaptable
Yeah,
animals.
they can
Fish, not
create their own ambushing environment, whereas most other fish they rely on some sort of structure or cover to ambush. And Fluke can, and that's why a lot of people ask me like, how do I read the beach? Like most striper fishermen spend a lot of time reading the beach or learning how to read the beach. My knowledge on that is middling, but I also think it's not that necessary for fluke because honestly, a fluke can be anywhere. They can just go to the bottom and then wait for something to go over their head.
yeah.
So, like at least inshore, you don't want to walk past like, a mile of beach and not make a cast because you think you know how to read the beach. That's just not really how it works. Is there anything you want to cover that we haven't?
I'm excited to see how I first time ever I have a couple of April
Oh, okay.
tog charters scheduled, so we'll see how those go. It's I'm hoping we get some warmer weather to drive up those temperatures. My boat's in the water now, but I've not even driven it today. It's pouring rain, and I just went down and checked that the boat was still floating. It was. Um, so I'm excited to try spring togging this year, and
Your charter business, you mentioned your website earlier, Just Fishing.
yeah, it's justfishinglongisland.com if anyone's interested in booking a striped bass, fluke, or blackfish trip with me. I have, I think we talked about this, right? 64 to 65 dates booked between late April
Nice.
through mid-November. The interesting thing is the tog stuff is the thing that I sell out the fastest on. I think about 80% of my October, November dates are already completely booked. So
Nice.
there's some availability there, but it might be like 7 days I have open out of like 50 possible days. It's like
Wow.
incredible how many people have already
Yeah.
booked for Tog because that's generally the one guarantee, and it's on light tackle. It's a lot of fun. We don't use anything over an ounce on the boat for that.
Nice.
And with the trolling motor, we can get in tight to some nice structure. Um, yeah, and then July and August are typically the months where we run a lot of fluke charters. I think, every weekend booked right now in the summer.
Nice.
But still a lot of availability on weekdays if anyone wants to, fish either Montauk or Block Island for big fluke.
Nice. Well, obviously, I will leave all that information in the description so people can reach out. Listen, John, thank you for your time. I know you're
Roger,
very
this was
busy.
fun. Thank you.
Definitely. We will
Thank you
do
for
this
having me.
again and hopefully I get in touch with JT and we can make that happen and maybe the three of us would do something again. So,
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. A lot of
awesome.
fun.
Awesome.